Hey, it's Em. I finally finished my reread of The Vampire Lestat. Okay, we got some stuff to go through. Alright, so Interview with the Vampire is ostensibly Louis Pointulac telling his story to the boy, an interviewer who in later books is revealed to be Daniel Malloy. The Vampire Lestat is Lestat's response to the success of Louis's book and Louis having revealed vampires to the world. It's kind of like he said, but Lestat doesn't go really through the same events as Interview, because obviously Louis only knows a very simple slice of Lestat's life. Lestat instead decides to spill his life story and frame the entire thing in modern, which was 1984 at the time of publication, modern day rock and roll. So it's 1984, and Lestat has dug himself deep into the earth of one of his properties in New Orleans. He's been down there since like 1929, and he's, apparently vampires periodically will do this. They get kind of overwhelmed. It's like sensory overload. They dig themselves into the earth for a few decades, sometimes centuries, and come back out when they're good and ready. Lestat has rock music seeping into his consciousness, and so in 1984 he is kind of driven to re-emerge and start a rock group, a rock band. He becomes aware of Interview with the Vampire and the Vampire Lestat as a character, and decides to make good on that by calling his band the Vampire Lestat and being the front man. It kind of makes sense, and it's funny because like Anne Rice at the time kind of had a Jim Morrison idea of Lestat's music. Nowadays I don't know what the equivalency would be, but also Anne Rice pictured Lestat as a young Rutger Hauer. Obviously, that would probably not be where we would go with casting these days either. We've had Tom Cruise, we have Sam Reed. Anyway, that's the frame story, but Lestat decides that since Louis has successfully, if dangerously, published the truth about vampires, at least as much as Louis knows it, Louis's little slice of it, he will spill his guts on everything he knows from his life and some of the deep, dark secrets of the vampire's origins, those who must be kept, which we heard Lestat reference in that last episode of the television series. Lestat uses all of this kind of as an excuse for his behavior towards Louis and Claudia. He spends a lot of time professing how much he actually loves Louis and Claudia and his little family, and that he simply couldn't tell them the truth because he had made promises to a very old and powerful vampire named Marius. And it would have put them all in danger if he'd told them the truth, obviously. We get Lestat's very complicated history with Armand. It's a lot. Lestat is, as Louis has said, a lot. Okay. So Lestat grew up a poor aristocrat in the countryside of France. he had a friend / lover named Nicolas de l'Enfant. He and Nicolas run off to Paris together to become stars of the stage. Well, Nicolas is a violinist, and Lestat, being Lestat, of course, just wants the attention that he never got from his family. There's a lot of psychological damage going on. But anyway, then he gets noticed by this very old and powerful vampire named Magnus, who lives in a tower or castle. It's mostly about this tower that we hear outside of Paris. He kidnaps Lestat, turns Lestat into a vampire. Lestat was born in 1959, if you do the math from the book. I know the TV show rounded it, I think, to 1759, 1760. Just, shy of the French Revolution. And in the book, Lestat is 21 when he's turned into a vampire. I know, again, in the show, they bumped that up to like 34. So, in any case, Magnus turns Lestat into a vampire, gives him only the most basic instructions, and then throws himself on a bonfire and leaves Lestat to kind of go. At that point, Lestat obviously has to shift his way of living, which confuses and upsets Nikki. But Lestat is glad to be able to send money to his mom and his family, even though his family was never very good to him. He is very close with his mother, as close as his mother will allow him to be. His mother's very aloof and kind of cold, but they have a bond. When his mother, Gabrielle, is close to dying of consumption, Lestat goes ahead and makes her a vampire. Then their relationship gets really strange because he starts calling his mother by her name. It's hinted at they're kind of like lovers, but the thing about vampires in the books, at least, is that they don't have physical relationships as we've seen between Louis and Lestat in the television series. The sharing of blood is really the form of physical, love between vampires. So it's not super clear. It kind of treads the line there with a little bit of incestuousness, maybe. But Gabrielle, is ruthless, and Lestat's whole story is very much designed to make him look sympathetic and loving and humanitarian in ways that Louis' version of events don't allow for. Louis' vision of Lestat is as someone who is loveless and cynical and narcissistic and abusive. And so it's, again, he said, the truth probably lies somewhere in the middle. I wouldn't necessarily say I'd trust Lestat's version of events more than I'd trust Louis'. Understanding, of course, that they're coming from two different directions and that Lestat has a lot more to him than those years with Louis and Claudia, obviously. Fair enough. So, going on. In an attempt to also win back Nikki's affections, Lestat turns Nikki into a vampire, but that goes horribly wrong in that at first Nikki is kind of comatose, and then he gets manic, and his hatred for Lestat only gets greater. Lestat at some point buys the Théâtre des Vampires, and, well, it wasn't the Theater of Vampires yet, but but he buys the theater that he and Nikki used to perform at, and then it becomes the Théâtre des Vampires, and here's why. Here's where we get to Armand. When Lestat becomes a vampire, he draws the attention of a coven that lives in the old cemetery Les Innocents. And they have this very kind of satanic old world belief of, vampires are meant to be miserable. We're not supposed to live in luxury. We're not supposed to just walk around like humans, and they're really, really angry that Lestat's doing all those things. That he's just out there living his life, I guess, or his afterlife, his non-life. Anyway, Armand is the leader of this coven. Again, Armand is like 15, 16 years old physically in the books. He's young. And auburn hair. We get his backstory. Again, he's from the Russian steppes. He was kidnapped, sold into, trafficked basically, and ends up in Venice under the care of a painter named Marius. Marius being the very old and powerful vampire that Lestat eventually will meet. Those who must be kept. That whole story, it's coming. But in the meantime, Armand is angry about Lestat and Gabrielle, and before Lestat turns Nikki into a vampire, Armand's coven kidnaps Nikki and torments him, I guess, to get Lestat to react or to get Lestat to come to them. They're mad because Lestat goes into churches without anything happening to him, and they don't think that's fair or right. They don't understand how that's possible, I guess. They're just very much steeped in some old superstitions. It's like the vampires are superstitious about themselves or something. Eventually, Lestat breaks up the coven, leaving Armand kind of without a family, without any form of support, any kind of system to live by. So Armand tells Lestat his story about becoming a vampire and how he ended up the leader of this coven in Paris, and begs Lestat to stay with him or to let him stay with Lestat and Gabrielle. He's like, Gabrielle's gonna leave you anyway. Your fledglings will never love you. Let me be with you. And Lestat says no. And Lestat and Gabrielle go off they decide to travel the world. So Armand stays in Paris with Nikki and the kind of remnants of the coven, and the Théâtre de Vampire becomes a thing. Under Lestat's money, though, and ownership, even though he's just like, you guys do whatever, I'm out. And then Lestat, having heard the story of Marius from Armand, starts looking for Marius, and eventually Marius finds him, and he gets the story of those who must be kept, who are basically what they call the mother and father of the king and queen of the vampires. And Marius's job is to care for the mother and father, who are also kind of comatose. They don't move much. They don't eat anymore. They just kind of sit on their thrones, and Marius brings them offerings, and and Lestat gets to meet them, see them, and eventually drink from Akasha, who is the queen of the damned. That's the next book. But it's designed to make you understand why Lestat is so powerful, and also designed, again, in that young adult heroine kind of way. Oh, Lestat is special. The queen responded to him and Marius loves him, and Marius is so powerful. All the powerful old vampires think Lestat is amazing. So, and you're just kind of rolling your eyes because, again, I don't know how much of this is Lestat wanting this to be true and how much of it is actually true, right? Now, we'll know later on that from Queen of the Damned that at the very least Lestat rocks Akasha's world because he wakes her up. But in the meantime, all of this. So Gabrielle has gone off. And that's the thing, like, Lestat, like, Nikki hated him and left him. His mother doesn't hate him, but she's not interested in civilization or humanity. She wants to go off into the jungles or whatever. So she's like, if you're not coming with me, I'm just going to go. So she takes off. And so Lestat's lonely. And then, he meets Marius. And Marius is like, yeah, but you can't stay. Go to New Orleans. There's no vampires in the New World yet. Go over there, do your thing. And Marius tells Lestat not to make a coven, but to make a family. And so, again, this is Lestat kind of coming up with an excuse for Louis and Claudia, where he was warned, though. Marius warns him, he's like, I made Armand too young. I got impatient. Wait, you never make one so young. Oops. But the through line in the Vampire Lestat is that Lestat, you can't tell him anything. Lestat is one of those people who only learns by doing, by experience, by making his own mistakes. And he loves being a rule breaker. I mean, it's very clear once we get to the rockstar stuff, how much he's enjoying the fact that all the other vampires are mad at him and want to kill him now for being so open and obvious. They already wanted to kill Louis. Louis managed to avoid them, lay low. But now they're even more angry at Lestat. And again, it's almost like Lestat was like, yay, I one-upped Louis. And his excuse is, oh, I'll draw fire and Louis will be safe because they'll be focused on me. But also, yay, they'll be focused on me. Which is Lestat all over. In any case, Lestat also does give a condensed version of his time with Louis and Claudia's death. And his version of events is quite different. First of all, in Lestat's version, he goes back to Paris after, the second time he is killed. So, Claudia kills him the first time by cutting his throat, and they toss him in the swamp. He comes back, and he makes that musician vampire kid to help him get back at Claudia and Louis. It's not clear, but the end result is Claudia and Louis run away and set fire to the French Quarter, and Lestat is badly burned, but he doesn't die because he's had blood from Akasha, and if you drink from more powerful vampires, you also become more powerful. So there are two ways to become really powerful as a vampire. Age, just over time, you get stronger. But also, if you drink from a vampire closer to the original source, the mother and father, Akasha and Inkiel, then you also get more power and sometimes superpowers, which explains Lestat's ability to fly. Now, in the Vampire Lestat, he explains that he never showed all of his powers to Louis because Louis already hated himself so much, and he felt like if he understood how powerful Lestat really was, he'd just feel more and more inferior. Jesus. Okay. Anyway, so it was only out of love that he never shared any of that information. We know, of course, that in the television show, he does show Louis and Claudia his ability to fly, but only under duress, I guess. Anyway, where was I? So after being burned, he's still terribly scarred, and he survived it, but only just. And so he goes to Paris to Armand to look for healing blood because drinking from humans is not going to do it, and there are at that point no other vampires around New Orleans that he can approach. And so he goes back to Armand because he doesn't know where his mother is, and begs Armand for some blood to help him heal faster. And he casts Armand as this villain who not only refuses to share blood with him, but jails him. And then Lestat kind of gets wishy-washy by explaining that he might have been delusional. He's not really sure if some of the things he remembers actually happened. And it's like, okay. But in Lestat's version, he doesn't see Louis, I don't think. So in Louis' version, he sees Lestat at the Théâtre des Vampires, like, you know, in the underground area where the vampires congregate beneath the theater. And Lestat demands that Claudia be killed for his attempted murder, but he also demands that Louis come back to him, and, you know, they start over. And Louis at this point has already kind of decided to go with Armand. He's made Claudia a new companion in Madeleine, and Madeleine and Claudia are going to go off and ostensibly do, you know, live their own little lifetime together, and Louis is ready to, you know, be with Armand. But Lestat's there demanding, no, Claudia needs to pay for her crimes, and Louis is innocent, but he's going to come home with me. And in order to save Claudia, Louis actually does attempt to barter. He's like, fine, I will go with you if you tell them that Claudia is innocent. She didn't know the rules. We didn't know there were other vampires. You treated us badly. You have to admit all these things. I'll come with you. Just spare Claudia. But as we know from, well, if you've read the book, you know that Claudia is not spared. And Claudia and Madeleine are killed. And Louis in the book is locked into in the 94 movie, they lock him in the iron, you know, coffin, but Armand saves him. And in the book, Louis sees Lestat one more time with holding Claudia's little yellow dress, and Lestat begs him again, like, did I say Armand? Well, anyway, he sees Lestat one more time holding the yellow dress, and Lestat begs him to just come with him. We need to talk. We need, you know, and Louis says no. And goes off with Armand, and he and Armand travel for many years together, until eventually they part ways in New Orleans. And in Lestat's version, Armand takes New Orleans as his new territory, and taunts him a little bit, because at that point Lestat has gone back to New Orleans. He's kind of slowly, he's eating like rats and stuff, just slowly getting his strength back and living in like a rundown old mansion in the Garden District. And Armand comes around and it's like, if you will love me, then I will stay with you. And, you know, and Lestat's like, you can't make me love you. I don't love you. Like, sorry, dude. I'll just do it on my own here. And then Lestat goes to ground. And Armand hunts the New Orleans territory and kills any young vampires that venture into it. So that's where we are until Lestat comes out in the 80s. And Armand is ostensibly, I guess, not around New Orleans at that point anymore. He doesn't really mention seeing or sensing him, I don't think. But there are a lot more vampires in the world at that point. And Interview with the Vampires come out, and Lestat writes his own book and is going to have this big concert in San Francisco, you know, kind of a one-night only thing, that draws lots of crowds, but also lots of anger from the vampires. And Lestat goes into San Francisco kind of looking for Louis, thinking he might still be around. And he is, and we get Lestat and Louis' reunion, and it's pleasant. Louis goes to the concert. He gets a backstage pass, I guess. He gets to ride in Lestat's Porsche. It's all very, you know, rockstar, and they're kind of dressed stupid with their little velvet capes or whatever. I'm trying to picture it, but I'm just like, I don't know what they'll do for the TV series. I don't know if we'll go rock star exactly. It's hard to imagine that's the way Lestat would do it in, you know, the 2020s. But and there's like a fear that Marius, who has warned Lestat never to tell about those who must be kept or, any of that. And Lestat has worked all of this mythos into his music. All of his songs are about vampires and their origins and, the mother and father and all this stuff. So he's in a lot of trouble, and he's concerned that Marius might come out and kill him. And some other vampires do come out and try and kill him. And Lestat and Louis and Gabrielle shows up, and they all fight off the vampires who are chasing them, and they get someplace safe. But, anyway, it ends on a semi-cliffhanger. Because you're supposed to move straight into the Queen of the Damned from there. And if you know the story, you know that it's Akasha who has been woken up by Lestat's music and is out there ready to kill off a bunch of the... She's ready to cull the herd, I guess. So that's more or less the story overall. But what we get is, what we get from Louis is that Lestat never loved him. Lestat was, materialistic, narcissistic, and all of this. And then Lestat's very condescending, even in his own book. He's like, I forgive him. He was just too modest to believe that I could love him. What? Okay. It's like, he just couldn't believe that someone like me could love someone like him, so he just assumed there were other reasons I wanted him. Alright, Lestat. But here's the thing, Lestat. Here's where you fail, because if the goal when you love somebody is to make it so that that person knows you love them, and that person goes out and tells the world you never loved them, you failed at loving that person. You were bad at it, because that person never felt your love, sir. Just gonna say. Okay? So, yeah. I'm going back a little to the whole... So anyway, Louis says he saw Lestat in the Théâtre des Vampires. Lestat's version of events is that Armand locked him up and refused to feed him, and he was delusional, and he's not sure exactly what happened. He was only there for blood. He was not there for revenge of any kind. I don't 100% trust Lestat's version of this. The kinder, softer Lestat in this book, I don't entirely buy it. He's, I'm so philosophical and I'm torn, and my love for humanity is just so great. And I really did only kill evildoers. I know Louis never believed that, but I did. He doth protest too much, maybe? I don't know. But in any case, I will say at the end of the day, the villain is Armand. Armand is, by both accounts, manipulative and vindictive, okay? Because Armand tells Louis, I'm the one who manipulated you into making Madeleine so that you would be free to come to me and you wouldn't have to worry about Claudia anymore. And then when that doesn't, when Louis still kind of, Armand does nothing to save Claudia or Madeleine, he says, I couldn't save them. I don't have the power, even though he was clearly the leader of that troop. Because Armand really just wanted Louis to himself. And we know from his confrontations with Lestat, and again, this is assuming Lestat is telling some version of the truth, that he was arrogant, vindictive. I mean, he and Lestat have a knockdown, drag-out fight at the Palais Royal that I had forgotten about entirely. I read this book. I haven't read this book since I was like 14. I loved it then, but it was a struggle to reread because Lestat is long-winded, he is repetitive, he is so self-absorbed and self-involved. It's like, dude, oh, you are insufferable. Or, as Marius likes to call him, the damnedest creature. You can see Crowley back here. Anyway. But what we have is really everybody loves Louis. Because Claudia loves Louis, Lestat loves Louis, Armand loves Louis. Like, it's like, and Louis is just kind of like looking for someone to cling to all the time. He was for the longest time. He kind of got used to being solitary and doing his own thing because all of his experiences with companion vampires, at least taken from these 2 books, were underwhelming, let's say. Now, we know in the television series he's still with Armand in 2019, 2020, whatever year it's supposed to be in this. I think COVID's happened, or hasn't it? I don't know. But it's modern day, more or less. So the question is, have they been together all this time? Now, knowing that they've shifted the timeline, all this time is not, 1800s to 2020. It's, more like 19-something. It's more like a lifetime, a very long lifetime, but, a lifespan could slot in. So maybe it makes sense that they're still together. Lestat and Louis were together like 65, 70 years in the books. Something like that before it all imploded. So anyway, yeah, the curious thing here is whether in the television series Armand will be sympathetic or actually as kind of awful as he is in the books. He's and whether in the books Armand turns Danielle Molloy into a vampire. So and he and Daniel become companions. So we'll see what take they decide on there. Yeah, I will say that it was kind of a joy at the very end of the Vampire Lestat to see Gabrielle Louis and Lestat together. Lestat was being obnoxious, as always, but he's just so giddy to have his mom and his ex-boyfriend, ex-husband, however vampires like to think of it, together, and Gabrielle and Louis are really funny because they agree on just about everything. Lestat's just laughing the entire time, and it's kind of dumb, but it's kind of cute. But you have to get through a whole hell of a lot because you get all of Marius's story in this book. You get Armand's, which is not as long as but Marius's is again the explanation of those who must be kept, and how they're ancient Egyptians who have a demon who came into their blood. And their bodies are no longer alive, obviously, but yeah, anyway. We get more of that story in Queen of the Damned as well. It gets complicated almost to an unnecessary point, but all told, I just want to again reiterate that I don't entirely trust Lestat's, as a narrator. I don't think he's 100% reliable. Again, I don't think I think it's less likely Louis lied than it is that Lestat is lying, just based on character. But Louis also didn't have all of the information, and you know, you could argue that he had reason to lie out of bitterness or something, but Louis doesn't seem bitter or hateful. You know, he's just kind of like, this is a thing that happened, and he's almost like sorry for Lestat, at least in interview. And Lestat is definitely the one who has more of a vested interest in appearing a certain way, right? Like, his ego and his public persona are very important to him. So given the two, I would probably lean more towards Louis than Lestat on a lot of things. Let me know your thoughts, your feelings. I will at some point reread Queen of the Damned. Get up to speed there. But yeah, I mean, do you think Armand's a villain? Or, you know, just are he and Louis honest to God, like soulmates or whatever? I mean, you know, let me know your thoughts.